welcome to our podcast. I am at a loss at which season we are at, but I'm very excited to be doing this with you again. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Hannah. It's 2024, year of the dragon, and lots of energy flying around in this year. So we're going to be seeing, I think, some really interesting things happening. The world continues to accelerate. Avocap becomes more and more real. And of course, something very significant also happened, which is that you had a lovely baby boy.
I
Congratulations.
did. Thank you. That's why we took a long break. Yeah, it was amazing.
Take some time and effort.
But I have to say, I mean, working with the Leadapreneur last year, at the same time being pregnant, I never thought I could do it, but I was able to do it. And with all your support and Shen's support and everyone else, right? So it was an amazing journey. There was a stressful moment, but it was very much manageable. Before coming back to work, I saw a lot of videos on Instagram where people were saying, you have a mommy brain, you don't remember things the same way, you don't want to work, you want to go and see your baby. And I thought I will have that. And I did have a bit of that too, because, you are missing out from being with the baby the whole day to not being with the baby. I did have that a bit, but it's just exciting to be here, working with our people and creating things for Cosmos, which is our innovation platform, and talking to our clients. It's just also exciting. So yeah, great year ahead.
Yeah, thrilling to have you back. And I think it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, as that idea of being a parent, you get to make choices about how you want to live your life as an individual first, right? Because that's always worth recognizing. Yes, one is a parent, but there are choices to be made around how much you want to commit maybe to your child and to yourself. And everyone can make their own choices, right? I do think it's healthy, though, to have a reasonable balance and not to be too obsessed about any one thing, whether it's just work, right? Or just looking after a kid, right? Of course, there can be moments where that's justified, but generally in the long term, it's good to have a healthy mix, isn't it?
True. And how would you describe, how was your last year?
I think last year, I think we just accelerated so incredibly fast. Like I couldn't have humanly done more without completely going insane, or just when I kind of think of myself, my role in Leadapreneur, and I feel like I'm this like pipe and there's so much information coming through that pipe across such a wide variety of things, whether it's the technology platform, whether it's the client side, whether it's the methodology, whether it's the team, whether it's operations, whether it's legal issues. Like there's just so much data flooding through my teeny tiny brain. And kind of really feel I've maxed out. And so that was kind of my experience of the last year. And I think we did some really extraordinary things. I think we've really taken what Leadapreneur can do to the next level. I think one of the things that's material success on that is with one of our clients being able to get the projects recognized by the accounting team, right? So the valuation of those projects, which was over $1 million has been recognized, which more than covered the cost of the program. So we're able to demonstrate, we've always kind of focused on that as the Leadapreneur, right? And the Leadapreneur guarantee that we guaranteed to ROI. But I think this is the first time that we've worked really closely with a client to get that into the audited accounts. And that's, I think, a real breakthrough. And for me, I think that's our version, SpaceX launching a rocket and landing it again. It's a breakthrough capability. I don't think there are many innovation. I've actually never heard of an innovation program that can do that. And we were able to do that. So I think that success is a tipping point for us to keep building that and to take us forward. So Definitely. I think that's really...
It's a good analogy you made, which is the rocket taking off and being able to land. And I think similarly for us, being able to take something you said, ideas to dollars, we still have a long journey ahead of us to make this even something bigger. Maybe seeing projects getting launched, getting recognized globally. That's what I would like to see in a few years' time.
Yeah, that would be awesome, right? Whether it's, externals or even in our own sort of Leadapreneur ecosystem, right? And so I think one of the things that kind of really stands out to me there is, yes, we want to have that success from a vendor client perspective, right? But I think it's also really powerfully about the success of the individual Leadapreneur, right? If your project has been recognized officially by your own organization as having contributed, let's say, $500,000, that's really cool. That's really cool for you. That's cool for your career. That's the tangible materialization of the better world in dollar amounts, hard dollar amounts, right? And we're able to demonstrate in that is you can go from having a vision, an idea of a better world, and translate that into a tangible outcome that has dollar valuation attached to it by hard-nosed people who are serious in their approach and not just sort of fluffy, but are like able to rationally recognize through their rigorous analysis the value that's being created. And so I think that's what I'm really thrilled about as from an individual, because that's always the challenge. You're not able to translate your idea into a dollar that gets universally recognized. And so I think what we've cracked there is really exciting. And I think that is great for Leadapreneur, but I also think that's great for Leadapreneurs. That can be it's not necessarily for everybody, but it's kind of like what I realized, it's kind of like an internal IPO. It's kind of a way of recognizing the value that you've created, right? If you're an intrapreneur inside an organization, you don't get to have an exit really. And that's, I think, one of the key challenges around entrepreneurship inside organizations is you don't get that big payoff that entrepreneurs usually do. And so I think this kind of mechanism of being recognized by the accounting and auditor team inside your own organization can be connected to rewards and payoffs that are maybe a halfway cultural approach in terms of the way in which you want to run your innovation culture between being a full entrepreneur and a full employee.
Well, speaking of ideas to dollar, I do wonder whose idea was it to create the Apple Vision Pro? Because until you mention it, and also because, as we've just mentioned, I had a baby, so I wasn't much connected to what's happening to the outside world. I watched the video today and I was amazed.
Yeah.
I'm so amazed as to having that ability to wear that headgear and be able to scroll through things, to be able to watch movies or videos of any size you want, to have, FaceTime with sort of almost, I would say, real life sizes, right? It's amazing technology. And let's just talk about the technology first, and then we go through how disruptive it can be. What do you think about that technology?
Yeah, well, let's introduce it to our listeners first, right? The idea of this podcast, this episode, is to look at the Apple Vision Pro and, a little bit by extension, Apple in general and the VR concept, right? So that's what we want to have a look at, isn't it? And so we're going to have a look at some of the story around Apple and the Vision Pro, and then we do some analysis, and then we'll end up with a conclusion of where we think it might go. And I think we should make some bets, make some decisions, and we should keep a list of it. And I think it'd be fun to revisit. We put it in our Google Calendar, right? Shout out to Google if we're talking about Apple. But, maybe in 1 year's time, we could come back and we'll have like an Excel. Shout out to Microsoft.
People would know, like, from this conversation, you're not an Apple user.
Disclosure, I bought Microsoft shares last week. Ooh, okay, yes, right. But yeah, I think it'd be fun to kind of, because, it's always interesting to talk about the future. And then when the future arrives, it's absolutely nothing like what you thought it would be, right? And I think that's always what's fascinating about it. In some sense it is, but in many senses it isn't. No one foresaw for 50 years ago that we would have these incredible devices like the smartphone that people kind of had this anticipation that there would be the ability to call people on a device that was mobile, right? But the integration of the data into it, that you can essentially learn anything about anything, essentially for free, is just incredible. Whether it's YouTube, whether it's sending messages and calls, right? Whether it's accessing AI, using apps, it's just astonishing. No one saw that coming in that way. And so I think that kind of gives a bit of a context there to the Vision Pro. What do you think? What do you want to share before we jump into it?
But I'm not looking at it from an analysis point of view or how it can affect the stock price or whatnot. Of course, we're going to get into that. You're going to teach me how to do it, how to think from that perspective. But I was looking at it from a user perspective, and I was really amazed at how it's just going to transform, as I said, everything as we know it. And my thought is, how is that going to... It started with Apple coming up with sort of a smartphone device, and then other companies followed through. And then they came up with wearable watches. I mean, there were some in the market, but Apple comes out with these products and then it just creates a havoc, I would say. So how other companies are going to adopt this, and is it going to grow bigger from there? Or, or is that just going to be a bust? Like, what was the technology? Like hologram. I think there was a point where some company made this watch where you could have this hologram projection coming out and things like that. Yeah, that's my thought on that. But let's just jump into your analysis and see what tips you can give us on, whether we should go ahead and look more into Apple, or should we, if you're talking about stock, should we go into and look at other companies, what they're doing?
Well, I definitely am not going to give any financial advice for sure. Well, it's going to be interesting, right? Because I've prepared a bit of analysis, and then I think we can weave it in with your perspective as a user and just have those different contrasting worldviews. I think what I wanted to kick this off with was looking back at the story of success of Apple, because it was by no means inevitable. Right now, it's just the start of 2024. But let's say 30 years ago, Apple was not really seen as that big of a success. It was 1994, and Apple was kind of losing to Microsoft. It was kind of dying. It had a niche space as sort of being a quirky technologist, these sort of transparent iMacs, and there was a certain amount of a little bit of coolness, but it was very niche. It was like if you're a designer, you used Apple. But also, again, in the 90s, there weren't many designers. It's not like we are today where everyone's a designer through Canva and things like that. So it was a very different reality. And so I want to kind of just pause to say, why is it that Apple went from that and also ran that basically was going to die? And the only reason it didn't die, so this story goes, is because Bill Gates gave them a loan. Right? Bill Gates, the founder and chairman of Microsoft, right? Bill Gates basically bailed out Apple. I think it was in the 80s or 90s. I think it was the 90s. Like, they were really not doing well at all. And no one thought that they were going to be able to really achieve something. Certainly not the world's first $1 trillion company, and absolutely not, right? So what I'm speaking about here is sort of the context of a bigger timeline. I'm not looking in the next 1-2 years. I'm looking back over the last 20 years, because it all kicked off with the iPod, right? This was this absolutely revolutionary device that was transformative in so many ways. And it was probably one of the first devices that made technology cool. because technology was not cool beforehand, right? Maybe it had a CD player or right something like that, or maybe about that. I think it was DVDs were just about coming out, but it wasn't cool. It was like a certain amount of niche there. And then this iPod came out, and suddenly it was really cool. I remember I had the first iPod. I might know my girlfriend at the time. She was 16, 17. She had the first iPod, and I thought it was just the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. And that really opened up the pathway for Apple, because the iPod then there were many iterations on the iPod, and then the iPhone came out. And most people in that day and time, and again, I really want to emphasize this, most people thought that was the dumbest thing Apple could ever do. There was no way that Apple could compete with Nokia and Sony Ericsson and some of the other brands at the time, right? It was a ludicrous idea. It was just ridiculous. But we all know what happened next, don't we? So the iPod, and what's also critical about the iPhone is that it cannibalized the iPod. Once you have an iPhone, you don't buy an iPod anymore because your phone now plays music. You don't need the music player. And this is a very important insight, because Steve Jobs made the courageous decision to destroy the very product that had resurrected Apple. Apple was riding up because of the iPod. So to release the iPhone was to destroy the iPod, and he knew that. Because you're not going to buy an iPod and an iPhone at the same time. You're not. You're just going to get one device. So the iPod is going to die. And I'll come back to that later on. So the iPhone then sort of, as we all know, became this outrageously successful product, right? But it wasn't just simply the genius of the iPhone. What really propelled the iPhone was the app concept. Again, so obvious today, but the app concept was so not obvious that the first iPhone ever released didn't have the app store on it. Right? There were apps on it, but there was no app store. There was a technology solution. It wasn't let's say, a way of working solution. So then the iPhone then led to the iPad. One of the most amazing things about the iPad is that if you just made the iPad its own business, that means you just sold off the iPad business of Apple, it would be one of the top 200 companies in the world in terms of its revenue. Like, it makes unbelievable amounts of money, the iPad, like stupid amounts of money, more money than most nations earn in tax. Right?
I never
that
knew
much
that.
It's crazy how much money. And basically, the iPod is essentially a large iPhone. It's not that much a bigger screen. There's lots to it. I don't want to take anything away from that, but it's not a radically different design and form and function, right? It's just a bigger screen. It's still touch screen. It's still apps, right? But it's very elegant and beautiful. And then from the iPad, what they then branched out into is sort of wearables, right? And then you have the iWatch, and then eventually is it iBuds? I couldn't remember what their name was, right?
AirPods.
There we go. AirPods, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, there's many other things. Of course, there's the Mac in the computing sense, right? That's always been a strong performer. But that's really the road that's helped Apple not only become a $1 trillion company, but become a cultural institution, right? A way of people's lives. Like, if Apple disappeared today, the world is in massive trouble. Right? If everything went down from Apple and just ceased working, we are all really, really, really big in trouble, right? And so that's kind of the story of remarkable success. But what I want to point to here is that we have to kind of understand that this story is based on this very important idea coined by the philosopher scientist Thomas Kuhn, I think in the 60s, which is the idea of a paradigm. And the idea of a paradigm is that he talked about it in the sense of science, that science works in paradigms, which you think that science is really free and open, but actually it's not. Science is actually often in many ways as strict as religion, because it's organized around certain beliefs. So, for example, you would have believed 100 years ago or so, a bit more, in Newtonian mechanics, which is the world is very linear and straightforward. And then suddenly when quantum theory and relativity come through, they are completely bonkers, right? Completely crazy ideas. And when they were first starting to be proposed, it was like people thought you were mad and they would laugh at you and mock you, right? And then what the scientific process does is, because it's data-driven, not tradition-driven, so when you can show the data and you can demonstrate that the theory of relativity is actually more correct than the Newtonian approach, then that takes the stage. But basically what you can then do is take this idea of paradigms and apply it generally to everything. So you have technology paradigms. For example, the horse, right? The horse was the technology paradigm for humankind for thousands of years. And then the car came along and a new paradigm emerged, right? And then, we could even break that down to petrol-driven cars. And now we have a new paradigm emerging of electric vehicle owners, right? So technology, like science, organizes itself around paradigms. And what Apple was able to do, the reason why it became a $1 trillion company, it was at the perfect moment in history to create the new paradigm, the mobile revolution, the transition in which people got supercomputers in their pockets, right? From the iPod to the iPhone, the story I've just told here. This is the story of the creation of the first paradigm and then the scaling up of that paradigm. But what we are now seeing, I believe, is the end of the paradigm. It's the S curve. The paradigm is basically an S curve. You start at the beginning small, then you have this rapid growth in performance and capability, and then you start to flatten out. There's only so much you can do. Cars were amazing and they beat out horses, but the performance of a car hasn't really changed in the last 20, 30 years, really. Okay, it's got a bit more safer, but the speeds are generally the same. It hasn't really been radically different compared to the early progress. And I believe what we're seeing now, the beginning of the end, I'm not saying it's going to happen anytime soon, but I think certainly in the next by 2030, let's say, I do believe we're going to see the end of what we might call, quote unquote, the mobile paradigm. This idea that we hold a device in our hands and we walk around with it, and that device is essentially basically Apple or Android based. That is a whole paradigm. 99.9% of human history was never like that. And it's not going to be like that into the future because things change so much. And so that's really the perspective I'm bringing in here to our conversation around the Vision Pro as a backstory. That where does the Vision Pro sit in the conversation around paradigms? Because it's this paradigm conversation that drives Apple from 1 trillion to 10 trillion. I'm not looking at the conversation of how we make a few hundred million extra for Apple. That's literally, it's not even a rounding error. It's negligible. The question is, how do you drive that massive change, right, to $10 trillion? And is the Vision Pro and what it represents as a paradigm, right, the way to get to $10 trillion company? Because what Steve Jobs pioneered and then Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, has done phenomenally well. And I think what it's worth, I think he did an excellent job. And the right thing was he rode the paradigm. He basically didn't mess with the format. You have a glass screen. It comes in various shapes and sizes. It can be an iPhone, it can be an iPad, it can be an iWatch, but it's basically the same thing. And you just get really, 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 really good at making that really, really excellent. It's a bit like saying we're going to really breed the best horses. And you can be the best horse breeder in the world, but if the paradigm shifts to a whole new technology, it doesn't matter. And zero horse breeders transition to car manufacturers. And so there's always this threat. And this is really what Leadapreneur looks at, is this: what do you do when you're successful? What do you do when the paradigm shifts? How do you make the leap into the next age? That, I think, is really the story of what disruption represents. So to kind of summarize this before we kind of hear some thoughts from you and move the conversation on, what I've developed, one of the ideas of Leadapreneur is this story of 0 to 1, 1 to 10, 10 to 100. And this is a really useful way of understanding how paradigms can be developed. It's not designed to be perfect. It's designed to be as a sense-making tool. So generally, when you start, you're going to go from 0% to 1%. And that's an incredibly difficult thing to achieve. Once you've achieved 1% of your full potential and capability, you're then going to go from 1% to 10% of the potential. And that's a different story versus going from 0 to 1%, as any entrepreneur knows. Getting your first client is not the same as getting your 10th client, for example, right? Making your first billion, making your first iPod or whatever is not the same as having made them more. And then you go from 10 to 100%. And that 100% represents the full capability of the paradigm, what it's able to achieve. But of course, you're going to keep pushing, and that's where you go beyond and you see what might be possible. And then you're going to hit a constraint, because it's not possible to keep infinitely scaling forever. This is the great illusion of traditional capitalism, and it's what causes the destruction of most organizations. So if I was to map what I've told you as a story onto this paradigm description, the iPod took Apple from 0 to 1%. It was a dying company. Without the iPod, it was going to die or essentially become irrelevant. The iPod resurrected Apple, 0 to 1%. The iPhone took it to 1 to 10%. And then the iPhone, in combination with the iPad, really rode that paradigm wave all the way up to the success, the 100% of the paradigm of which Apple is running on the Apple ecosystem. And then Apple started to explore with things like wearables and AirPods, which creates an ecosystem, a constellation of devices around your Apple lifestyle. Now, where does the Vision Pro fit into this? Into this, it doesn't fit. The question is it going to be the beginning of the next paradigm, or is it an illusion and it's going to just cause nothing really at all?
But before we go into that question, Jan, I want to ask you, how does one know how to make that shift from one paradigm to another? Because you're mentioning that, they've made the best of phones, and then they have a win in that space, and now they're moving to another space. So any other company, how do you know when of course, you have your analyst sitting there, you have your developer sitting with you telling you that, we've done the best, now let's move to another. But otherwise, what other factors can help you make this decision?
Yeah, I think, that's such an amazing question to ask, and it's so rich. And I think, to try, the most important thing I could suggest to someone as a senior leader is that you need to radically understand that you absolutely do not get it, and you're never going to get it. This is the key. Because if you think you're getting it, if you think you are the organization that decides what the paradigm is, you've already missed the point, because new paradigms come from what's called the periphery. They don't come from the key players. They come from the new upstarts who are doing radical new things that your company's never even thought about. And so what a classic example of this would be Microsoft. Microsoft missed mobile. And you might say, how on earth did they miss mobile? It's so obvious, right? It's a technology thing. You have one of the world's biggest technology companies at the time, right? And still today, right? But Microsoft completely missed the transition to mobile because they just didn't get it. And they didn't get that they didn't get it. And then as they started to get that, they didn't get it and tried to get it and they were just moving far too slowly. Another example, BlackBerry, a pioneer of the mobile revolution, thought that they got it because they were the center, right? BlackBerry was, in London, the term, and New York was crackberry. Everyone was literally addicted to their BlackBerries, right? BBM, BlackBerry Messenger, was the first global WhatsApp. How on earth did they stuff that up? Because they thought that they got it. And there's just a foundational lack of humility. And so one of the things that's not so well known is that when Steve Jobs created the iPod, he essentially took what's called a skunk works approach, which means it refers to a US military term, but basically you create a black ops secret operation. iPod was not generated within the traditional Apple organization because Steve understood that when you try to do something radically innovative and different and disruptive inside the traditional organization, the traditional culture is going to kill it. You cannot succeed. It will fail, guaranteed. So instead, he literally set up a separate building in a separate state with this, like, completely, no one knew about it. It was black ops, because that's the challenge that you're facing as an incumbent, is your cultural mindset and what we know as the bureaucracy murdering innovation. That's your difficulty. It's not that your people aren't smart enough. It's that your cultural systems and your belief systems about how the world works are not going to be aligned with this, because you will not want to disrupt your status quo. Most traditional companies would not have developed the iPhone after the iPod, because they would have kept wanting the iPod to make more money. And this is the decision that cost Nokia the future. Nokia saw the iPhone. Nokia's plan to build an iPhone-like device was like between 2015 and 2020. And so to add to the conversation, this is talked about so much, what I can add to it is that unless the senior management and leadership understand at a very profound level, and I really mean profound, that they don't get it, and that they need to be very open to the source of disruption, because it's going to be what you least expect it, you're not going to see it until it's too late. And that's why companies die, because they don't see it until it's far too late. And so I think that's kind of the challenge there now for Apple, because they are the incumbent. They are the status quo. And so they are at great risk of not getting the next revolution. Yes, they are the first to $1 trillion, but will they be the first to 10 trillion? Well, that's a part of this bigger context and story that we're talking about in terms of Vision Pro. One thing that's interesting to note, just yesterday it was announced that Apple canceled Project Titan, which was their secret electric car that they were trying to develop. That was going to be sort of the iPhone of the car revolution, but they couldn't do it. They couldn't pull it off. So they decided to cancel it. And so I think that, that what we see is this sort of almighty company that can conquer anything and do anything, and Apple will figure it out. Yes, that has been true in the past, but that was true because the paradigms aligned. It was the right product at the right time in the right wave. Is the next 10 years about everyone globally strapping Vision Pros to their faces and disappearing into this world at a scale that will drive $10 trillion valuation? I personally don't think so. And I don't think even that there is that appetite, because again, we assume that young people want technology because Apple used to be cool. But I think a lot of young people today want to distance themselves from technology. From the people that I interact with, often they don't want to be on Facebook, Instagram, or Snap, or whatever social media is. They want to get away from it. They actually prefer physical here and now. They do have a digital presence, but it's not wow for them anymore. It's every day. It's ordinary, right? It's not magical. And so this idea that we're going to put these virtual reality devices and disconnect so radically from our outside environments to it is, I think, it's just a flaw in the thinking. It kind of feels like, I wrote this phrase down, I might get in trouble about this, but whatever. It feels like old people deciding what the future should look like. They read some sci-fi books in the 70s and 80s, like Ready Player One, and then they're, oh yeah, that virtual, because in that time, virtual reality was the crazy technology, right? And now we're there, they're trying to make it happen, but it's not going to go I don't think it's going to go in that direction. The final thing I want to point out here, and this is also super fascinating, I think, the entire success of Apple, right, was based on the iPod, right? And the key marketing message of the iPod at the time was have thousands of songs in your pocket. Now, that today for us seems ridiculous, right? That's just so obvious, that's a trivial amount. But in the past, you only had CDs with maybe 16, 20 songs on it, right? And then this MP3 technology came out that could compress songs. But the real killer, Hannah, and this is the dirty secret of Apple, is nobody had thousands of songs. Nobody did. We had like a few CDs. So where on earth did everybody get all these thousands of songs from? They got them because they pirated them. Kazaa, LimeWire, Napster, maybe the most iconic example. Because of this essentially internet piracy, suddenly everyone magically had thousands of songs, and they needed a device to carry those songs around in. And that's why they bought the iPod. Without the piracy, there would never have been a demand for iPod at the scale that they saw it, right? Sure, people would have bought it, but 99.9% of people did not have 1,000 songs, right? They had vinyl and CDs. And so that's, I think, also an interesting mix about what I'm talking about, this change in paradigm and these really disruptive technologies, is that they have to rely on extraordinary circumstances. And what I'm looking at the Vision Pro, my critiques of it are, it's not riding on a disruptive cultural trend. It's not something radical as like MP3 piracy was at the time. Now, I'm not endorsing illegal activities. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is the future doesn't unfold as the corporate boardroom plans it in a nice, smooth PowerPoint presentation. It's a lot more messy, and it just seems far too convenient to think that the Vision Pro is going to seamlessly just be adopted because you have an iPhone, you have an iPad, you have an iMac, and an iWatch, and now you need a Vision Pro? No, you don't. There's no demand for it. The reason why you bought an iPod is because you had illegally downloaded, you had magically acquired, shall we say, thousands of songs. But without that, you would never have bought it. What's going to drive the demand for the Vision Pro beyond just the trivial use cases where you can have a bigger screen strapped to your face? After the first week or two, you're going to get bored of that, and you're going to realize all the limitations that come with it. And so that, I think, is sort of that really important element of the conversation around the Vision Pro, because it doesn't strike me as writing anything truly disruptive, and it's not disrupting the Apple ecosystem. It's not as brave a decision as the iPhone versus the iPod, because the iPhone destroyed the iPod, right? Let's not forget that. The Vision Pro is not designed to destroy any of those markets. It's too nice, it's too easy, it's too convenient. It's the market incumbent who's using their technological prowess to show off the latest little jewel and toy that they think everyone's going to rush out and buy, but there's no killer demand for it. And so that's why I propose that we're going to see whatever it is that's going to be the radical technology in the next 5 years. It's probably going to be something AI related, and it's going to come out of somewhere radically different. No one saw coming, and it's going to be astonishing. It's going to be like the magic that we see with ChatGPT, but even more astonishing. And I think it's going to be a radical departure from the existing paradigm. So some early glimpses of what that might look like is the Humane pin. If you Google search that, HUMANE pin. What that is basically, it's a small little device like a traditional old calculator you put in your pocket, and it projects the screen onto your hand. So you don't interface with an app ecosystem anymore. There's also something called the Rabbit R1, which essentially is just you talking to the AI. So you would just say to the AI, book me some flights to New York tomorrow, give me some options. And it will just do all the searching and everything for you and just give you 3 options. So it sits on top of the app layer. You don't go into apps anymore. The whole Apple concept is that you have a screen and you click on an app and then you use that app to navigate, right? And that replaced essentially the old internet where you went to a website. And I'm really simplifying it here, but that's the paradigm, right? The next paradigm is not going to be app-based, I don't think in 10 years' time we're going to be using apps. We're going to be using something radically different. And what we're seeing right now with companies like OpenAI, and OpenAI is just the beginning of this entire new generation of companies that are much smarter, much faster, and much better at the new technology than Apple is. You've basically got the really hungry young boys and girls who are in their late teens, early 20s, who look at Apple as the guys to beat. Apple are the losers. They're not the cool guys anymore. And they have the new technology, and they have money, and they're empowered with today's venture capital ecosystem at a global scale to go out and make that happen. And so whatever we're going to see, I just don't believe it's going to be this Vision Pro. It's too boring. It's not actually that radical. It's not that interesting. It's not, because no one's rushing out. There aren't people fighting in the streets to do that. One of the most powerful stories where you saw the power of the iPod was there was a tragic story where, I can't remember the exact details, but I think it was like a young man was murdered in New York for his iPod. He was shot and killed for his iPod. And that kind of showed what this status symbol had become, right? That people were so desperate for this device that you would kill for it. Right? And Steve Jobs went to meet the family of the murdered boy, and there was this whole thing, right, that came out because this has never happened before. Maybe you mug someone for money, right, or something like that, but this was a device. It's just a music player, right? No, I don't think people are going to be maybe necessarily doing that in the same way. Maybe people are stealing Vision Pros, but yeah.
I have a different, before we end thing, I have a different views on that, because it might not be the thing that people would kill for, but I think it gives that Apple has the ability to make something look very wow. And I think that's what the video ad of Vision Pro does. But when you're talking about paradigm shift, and I think what wearable is doing is, from moving from your phone to your watch, it's because you don't want to hold a phone and your watch is accessible to your messages, your calls and stuff. And now having that headgear on, you don't have to carry a laptop around or sit at a computer. You can just walk around and be doing your stuff, because it allows you see both worlds at the same time. And I think to a certain extent, it's going to be wow. So if we have to make a bet right now, I would say that this is a winning ticket for Apple, but I can see you going through the different routes. So let's have a conclusion note on that, and we'll be ending the podcast soon.
Yeah, great point there, Hannah. So define winning ticket. Where do you think this is going to go? Come on, time running short on time. So make your call. Three things, or at least one.
Oh, wait, I'm a bit at loss. What three things? You make your three things first, and then I'll.
I think I have utmost respect for what Apple has achieved. So I don't say this in any negative way. I come at this from a theoretical perspective of paradigm analysis. But I don't think the Vision Pro is going to really scale. I don't think it's going to work. I think it represents a certain stagnation in Apple. They've run out of ideas, truly remarkable ideas. And I think they're going to face a situation like Microsoft did, where I think Apple's missed the boat on AI. And I think they're going to face a situation like Microsoft did, where they missed mobile and they had to recognize that they missed it and then regroup and decide what to do now. And what's great about that story is Microsoft's back, and now at a certain point recently was the world's most valuable company in the world, right? Beating Apple. So even though it's a remarkable technology, I don't want to take anything away. I don't think it's going to be the future. And I think it's going to take Apple down the wrong path. They think that they get it, but they don't get it. And that lack of humility there and that desire to really disrupt themselves is indicative of the fact that they are vulnerable to disruption of a radical new magical technologies that I think are just on the horizon. So for me, the Vision Pro in summary is a bit like the mini disc technology. The mini disc was a halfway transition between CDs and MP3s and eventually streaming. It wasn't the future, but for a moment it did look bright, but then it kind of died down. What do you think?
I think it's going to bring some sort of disruption to others, and it's going to revolutionize. So it's going to change the way we do things like entertainment and video calling and work. So I do think that it's going to be huge, and probably other companies will adopt this technology, and we will be seeing more of headgears and Vision Pros in the market. That's what I think.
Well, it's been a great chat with you, Hannah. Looking forward to seeing the future together with you.
Okay, so see you all next week with a new topic in mind, and hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thank you, Jan, for your time.